James Anthony Sullivan, was born on August 13, 1939, in Nebraska, but grew up in San Diego, California, during World War II. In his years of high school, he often immersed himself in guitar, and would spend most of his time listening to local blues groups, as a part of his daily routine. Which was stated that he would later play guitar, in a local rock band, called the Survivors, but it wasn't until later that he met his future wife, Barbara Sullivan, who'd worked as a clerk at Capitol Records. Also around this time, they opened a bar with a friend. Unfortunately, it has been out of business after a year of opening, would later move with his wife, Barbara, and young son, Chris, to Los Angeles in 1968. At which, he spent his days songwriting, and listening to some records, of Karen Dalton, John Prine, and the folk singer, Jon Stewart. It seems like he went on to write music, and record singles, but they were not that much successful. And at the time, he gained regular work at Wrath Club in Malibu, where he became friends with popular actors of the day, such as Lee Majors, Lee Marvin, and Harry Dean Stanton. Even landing a small part, in the classic road movie Easy Rider, where he was close friends with Dennis Hopper, in 1969. In which, supporters who recognized his talent, put up the cash to record a UFO, the recording session musicians were members of the Wrecking Crew, who backed the Beach Boys, Simon, and Garfunkel, and other stars on many hits. They included keyboardist, Don Randy, drummer, Earl Palmer, and bassist, Jimmy Bond, who also produced and arranged Sullivan's album, which was issued on Money Records. Despite Sullivan's style, has been compared to other folk rockers artists, such as Gene Clark of Byrds, and Joe South. Unfortunately, UFO was unsuccessful. Due to his unsuccessful music career, which made him lead his marriage to the edge of collapse, while his wife was having with their second child, which after his daughter named Jamie. Over the next 6 years, Sullivan continued to perform at the Raft, and other clubs, but his life was beginning to fall apart. Sullivan believed some of his music was stolen out, and he developed a drinking problem, and fell into depression. On March 4, 1975, seeking a fresh start, Sullivan decided to leave Los Angeles for Nashville, in his Volkswagen Beetle, left his wife, and 2 children behind, and said that he would return for his family, once he got settled in Nashville. After a 15-hour drive, he stopped at a motel in Santa Rosa, New Mexico. But things would take a turn for worse since then. According to reports, his key was left in the room, and he had not slept in his bed. It was believed for him to rent a motel room, and leave without staying in it. The next day, someone saw him at a ranch, where his car was left abandoned, and Sullivan was nowhere in sight. Sullivan had gone missing, and left money, paper, clothing, unsold records, and his guitar behind. A month prior to his disappearance, his manager asked, "How would you disappear?" And then Jim replied, "I'd walk into the desert, and never come back." Following days went on, his wife had not been reached. For a few days, that became more suspicious. She began to call the police, and hospitals. They learned that after 15 hours on the road, Sullivan had been pulled over, on suspicion of driving under the influence. Little did they know what happened to Sullivan. After that, a body believed to be Sullivan's was found, just a few miles away, but it turned out, it was someone else. Some believe that he had been murdered, or may have been intoxicated. He became disoriented, and wandered off, ultimately dying of exposure in the desert. There's a less plausible, but still possible idea, that he might have simply disappeared by choice. But there's one theory, that follows the lore surrounding Jim Sullivan, after all this time. And you absolutely know where this is going: he was possibly abducted by aliens. Attempting to account for Sully's lost hours, in Santa Rosa, Matt Sullivan, in Moss, visited in 2010, chasing leads. A gas station worker told the police, that Jim Sullivan, had asked for directions back to California. Friends didn't view Sullivan as suicidal, despite his hardships. No one could explain why he had driven instead to a remote area, or why he refused Pete Cena's offer of a ride, in the cold desert winter. After investigators couldn't turn up Sullivan, or a reason for his disappearance, 2 of his brothers arrived to conduct their own search. Volunteers found no trace of Sullivan. Jim would never be seen again. The desert had taken him. Some say he got out, and just kept on walking, and walking, just like he said, until he couldn't no more. Part of me thinks, he made it to an oasis, brushed himself down, and started his life again. Whatever happened in the sand, stayed in the sand, only to be blown away by the wind. After his disappearance, the police towed the abandoned VW Bug back into the town, and the trail turned cold. A number of things were found in the car, including Jim's wallet, guitar, clothes, reel-to-reel tapes, cassettes, silver appointment book, and a box of LPs of Jim's 1972 self-titled album on the Playboy label. However, most people do not believe he took his own life, and his wife does not believe he ran away. Despite an exhaustive search, with the help of various state and national agencies, investigators came up with nothing. Neither Jim nor his remains have ever been found. Sadly, the case went cold.